Were the teams we thought were the best in the Chicago Catholic League actually the best teams on the field in Week 1? Mount Carmel and Brother Rice, the top-ranked teams in classes 8A and 7A, both open with losses. Nazareth was knocked off by IC. Providence went into St. Rita and came away with a victory, and Benet made a statement by defeating defending Class 1A state champ Lena Winslow. We also saw running backs take center stage, several breakout performances, and a few teams that may be much better or in greater trouble than we expected. Welcome to the Varsity Voices. I'm Joe Freveletti, joined by my brother Dan, and today we're recapping all 20 Week 1 games involving Chicago Catholic League teams. We'll give you the scores, the standout players, and some of the biggest storylines. So Dan, let's get started. And before we jump into some of the games here, remember last year we had several conversations about who is or what is the premier position in the Chicago Catholic League. And I think, we tossed around the quarterbacks, but I think we settled on wide receivers, right, last year, because there's just some outstanding wide receivers in the Chicago Catholic League. But after Week 1, I think there's another position here that is vying for the premier position in the Chicago Catholic League, and that's running back, Dan. And listen to some of the stats that I have here from some of the running backs and some of the teams that I covered. All right.
Okay.
We've got Tyson Hooks from DePaul Prep, over 130 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. He also threw for a 2-point conversion. Tivius Caldwell from St. Francis, 148 yards rushing and a touchdown. Jacoby Baldwin, just an unbelievable performance against Nazareth, 204 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Connor Hunt, 136 yards rushing and a TD. The 2 running backs for Loyola, Melo Maldonado, 135 yards and a touchdown. Jaden Garrett, 104 yards and a touchdown. The 2 running backs for Providence, Broden Macker, 2 touchdowns. Braden McKay, 2 touchdowns. Marmion's running back, Henry Miller, 2 touchdowns. And in his first varsity game, running back, junior Chris Love from Notre Dame, 196 yards rushing, 4 TDs, 2 rushing, 2 receiving. If, they really sent a message, I think, the running backs in the Chicago Catholic League this Week 1.
We talked about that early on with some of these teams that might have new quarterbacks and that teams might have to lean on their running game a little bit. And it's probably a good idea early on anyway. And it's old school, but if you can beat a team by running the ball and you realize you don't have to throw that much, then keep it on the ground. Let those guys get those carries in. Let the offensive line start to work up a lather and really get used to run blocking together. One you didn't mention, Joe, Jaden Miranda for St. Pat's was outstanding. He was his own line when he needed to be and behind a really good offensive line. So another one that was really, really good. And it was just it doesn't surprise me that it's running backs early on with a lot of new faces at quarterback. We'll see how that develops over the year. Some of these offensive coordinators sometimes I think aren't patient enough to run the ball consistently, but this was a great week for the running back position in the Catholic League, and it really doesn't surprise me. It was great all over, Joe. I mean, I know some games locally by me. Oswego's running back was incredible. At Neuqua Valley, I think close to 300 yards rushing. I had someone calling me, telling me this is the best running back I've ever seen. So there's we've got a lot of names we can watch this year from the running back position.
Yeah, we do, and it's going to be fun to watch because when you've got this many really good / great players at the running back position, to see them, or the ability to see them keep this up consistently, that'll be the key thing, right? From this point going forward as we get into the rest of the season. But you mentioned there were some really good games, some really tough games, some surprises, and we want to recap some of these, Dan, and I want to start with East St. Louis and Mount Carmel. So 2 preseason number 1 teams, right? 8A and 6A,
6A,
correct?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, Mount Carmel loses this game 42-23. And Joe, I think the thing that really stood out about this game, which I hate to be like, again, I sound like an old man screaming at a cloud, but it was sloppy and the officials just dragged this game down to a snail's pace. I wish they could either ignore some things or understand the gravity of the game, where it's at, and understand you might have to let some things slide if they aren't really critical to the play. I know there's pre-snap penalties that you can't really ignore, and there were a bunch of those. But my goodness, when they did make calls, it was forever to get the call kind of called and walked off, and it just really made this game herky-jerky, a lot longer than it needed to be. And both the teams were a little sloppy early on, and
Yeah.
turnovers, injuries, and special teams played a big role in this game. Injuries, Ryder Starts went down from Mount Carmel in the first half.
They took him off in an ambulance, right?
Yeah. Let's hope he's okay. But the Cook for East St. Louis, their stud running back, he didn't play in the second half. So you had some backups with some key time in different positions. Brady Clardy for Mount Carmel played quarterback, and he was 14 for 30 with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And Mount Carmel turned the ball over twice in 1 minute early in the fourth quarter to take what seemed like a comfortable lead in that game and kind of turn it on its head and give East St. Louis the advantage and finally the victory. And a late pick 6 for East St. Louis really sealed the game. You can see, Joe, these two teams are incredibly talented. Marshawn Thornton looks like a man among boys. Their receiving core looks like that. He had 2 touchdowns. Ronnie Gomiller for East St. Louis, 4 touchdowns. I think I texted you during the game that I would give this kid a bag of NIL money to play for my team. He is something else, and he's committed to Cincinnati, and I think they have a good one. He reminds me of some of these players in the NFL that can do it all. He's not real big, but he can carry the ball. He's great receiving. But I think Mount Carmel has a little work to do, and it was hard to tell necessarily on the broadcast that they may have come out a little flat in the first half, believe it or not. I don't know. It could just look like that, but
the whole
did you see that?
Game looked flat to me. Yes,
and is that the
game
officials?
Looked flat to me, and I think that was part of it for sure. Yeah, but I also felt like maybe the officials and how they called the game and how there were so many breaks in the game, and as a player, what that does to you, you're like, all right, come on, I want to play football. Let's go. And I just feel like they did the game some disservice with all the calls and all the breaks that they created in that game.
Yeah. And, I'd like to see Mount Carmel, and I'm not an offensive coordinator. Again, I sound like the old man here, but I would like to see them establish something. Nathan Samuels, I'd like to see him get more touches, and East St. Louis plays really good defense.
Me
and
too.
it wasn't all that easy to run the ball, but, it seemed like they would try to sustain something, and then they'd try and throw deep. Successful sometimes not. But, wanting to throw home run balls all night, which I get with that receiving core, but East St. Louis isn't your average team. I felt like if Mount Carmel tried to control the ball, they may have been able to a little bit more, either with controlled passing, some intermediate routes, or by trying to run the football with Nathan Samuels, who's a great player. It's not like you're giving anything up doing that. So it's a tough way to start. East St. Louis comes out, and I predicted this in our prediction weekend or prediction episode.
You were right. I was wrong on this one, Dan. Yep.
Yeah. And Mount Carmel loses this again, 42-23. And then they have to go out to New Jersey to play St. Joe's, a regional team next week. So it doesn't get any easier for them.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think St. Joe's has not played a game yet, or St. Joseph Regional, and having a game under your belt helps. But I was wondering as I was watching this game, or at the end of the game, Dan, I know it's only game 1, but considering all the hype around Mount Carmel and all the projections for them, not only locally, but nationally, I mean, should we be concerned about Mount Carmel, or was this simply just an extremely difficult kind of opening assignment for them?
I think that no matter how many great players you return, there's still some things to work out, and you're not quite sure what type of team you're going to have. Losing your quarterback then in the first half, changes everything. Really, kind of changes the game plan. Ryder starts as a guy who could really run, and he's going to make a difference with his feet. So there was a kind of a changing game plan there. So that had to be something that was troubling for them. I hope it's not a real serious injury, but no matter what, no matter how talented you are, there still takes a little time to come together, and that kind of a slog of a game doesn't really help that. So I'm not worried yet,
Yeah.
but we'll have to see how they kind of come together and where their health is at.
All right, so let's move on to the next game, Dan, and that is Marist versus Simeon. So Marist opened the season with a 44-28 victory over Simeon. But I think maybe the biggest storyline here, Dan, may have been the arrival of a new brother-to-brother connection for Marist. Junior quarterback Jake Fleming, 12 of 17 for 259 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first varsity start. And 2 of those went to his younger brother, who's a sophomore, Connor Fleming, and who finished with 5 catches for 74 yards, also in his first varsity starts. I think Marist, and I watched a bit of this game, they really showed some balance offensively. This game, too, was a little bit herky-jerky, I'm using your term, because of the officials. I think that's the other storyline around week 1. The officiating was really difficult. But, somebody we've talked about and mentioned a lot is their running back, Connor Hunt, and he carried the ball for 28 times for 136 yards, so a really good game. Also caught a 33-yard touchdown pass. Chase Toka added 89 receiving yards on only 2 catches, so big plays. Billy Nitschke, another player, broke a 29-yard touchdown run for Marist. And Marist went up 27-6 at halftime, and they really were in control of this game most of the time. Now, Simeon in the fourth quarter scored 22 points. That's why the score seems a little closer than maybe the game actually was. And Simeon had some good moments, but I really think that Marist kind of controlled this game and did exactly what they wanted to do for their week 1. And for me, we talked about this in some of our preview episodes, but Marist came into the season with some questions at quarterback, right? But after one game, the Fleming brothers may have given them maybe a new identity, right? The quarterback through his brother, the wide receiver. And the talent is clearly there. The next question for me is whether Marist they're going to have to, you mentioned, clean up some stuff. Marist is going to have to clean up some stuff too. They had too many penalties, a couple of discipline issues as well out there on the field. So they cleaned those things up, but Marist looked strong. They looked ready going into the season. And I think they answered a couple questions that we had as well as other people had regarding Marist.
Yeah, and the blue division is shaping up to be everything we thought it was going to be. These are 4 really good teams. There's not a ton of surprises in if there's in the wins and losses that are going to happen in the blue division, regardless of where teams are ranked and what type of players they have. So Marist, they have a great program. They don't necessarily have to rebuild, they reload. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that they've got people we haven't necessarily talked about that are making a statement right away.
Yeah. And they play, let's see, their next game they play King, who we'll talk about a little bit later because King beat St. Lawrence this week. So so that'll be a good matchup. But, the next game here, Deanne, and you've got some of the biggies here, and it's the Lincoln Way East and Brother Rice game.
Yeah. So, guess 1 and 2 kind of in the power rankings of the Catholic League both go down. And while it's a surprise, both of these teams that they lost to are established great programs. Brother Rice loses 22-21 to Lincoln Way East, and while it's a surprise, it's not really a surprise. It's not like this shock because Lincoln Way East is always really good. They are also a team that has an established program that's going to always have great players. You know, what was interesting for Brother Rice, and we kind of talked about this in the prediction episode, played two quarterbacks. They threw the ball, I don't know, 44 times, you know, between Galasso 29 times, 16 for 29, 170 yards, and two interceptions, which were big. And freshman Sam Holcomb, who was 11 for 15 and 119 yards with no interceptions. He also accounted for all three of the Crusaders' touchdowns on you know, a couple of 1-yard runs. He had a 53-yard run. So we saw a lot about his arm talent over the course of the summer. You know, he's showing that he can do it athletically as well. And just as a freshman, it's just unbelievable that he's getting this done. You know, and Brother Rice kind of seemed like they were in control of the game. They made some mistakes as the game went on, especially on the defensive side of the ball. You know, allowed Lincoln Way East to kind of stay in this game. Even so, Brother Rice appeared to be in the driver's seat in the fourth quarter. Lincoln Way East runs a flea flicker that goes for a 60-plus yard touchdown, and then Brother Rice goes 3 and out right away. You know, and Lincoln Way East gets a clutch field goal and plays great defense and walks away with a, you know, quote unquote upset victory. So there were a lot of mistakes, a lot of things to clean up, that which might be a theme developing in this night's podcast. But a lot of mistakes, and Brother Rice, just their defense did not look as solid as a group as I thought they might. And you've got to give Lincoln Way East some credit. They capitalized when they had to and played what looked like better defense, you know, as if you look at it as a whole. But really interesting loss for Brother Rice. And I don't know if you got to check this game out at all, but it was kind of interesting and looked like they might have some stuff to clean up. I'll be interested to see if they stick with the 2 quarterback system too.
Yeah, your last point right there is the one I was going to make, Dan. And how you watch some teams and they run the 2 quarterback system, and usually it's kind of like a change of pace, right? One quarterback is maybe a thrower, the other one is a runner, or something else along those lines. I didn't get that feel from the 2 quarterbacks that Brother Rice used in Holcomb and Galasso, right? So I'm not a coach. I'm not a good coach like Brother Rice's coach is, but I think we may see over the course of the year that one of these quarterbacks gets the bulk of the snaps. And I'm not sure who that's going to be, but I do feel like what they did on offense with using the 2 quarterbacks didn't quite work or gel for me, at least from a watching standpoint, and really how much success they had doing it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always kind of believed if you have 2, you don't have 1, you know, but these guys both look really capable, you know, so I think they might have a hard time going away from that. I guess maybe if you continue to see more mistakes, you know, or turnovers by one of the quarterbacks, you may see one start to get more and more time. You never know what's going to happen with injuries in this conference. You know, that's going to be a thing for some of these teams at some point. So you'll just have to kind of continue to watch that. But, you know, again, I came away thinking too, yeah, they've got a little work to do. You know, and while Lincoln Way East does
gotta clean it up a bit,
but Lincoln Way East is so well coached. That Coach Vonar is just one of the best coaches, you know, in the state for a lot of years. If he's not in the Hall of Fame already, he's gonna be because they just do a great job, and you can see how well they're coached during the games, you know, that they're playing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brother Rice, their next game is against Woodlawn. Woodlawn, who's won after beating Marine Leadership Academy 38-0. So it'll be interesting week 2 game for Brother Rice.
Yep.
But the next game here, Dan, is Loyola versus Warren. And I watched some of this game as well, as I did a lot of these. But, you know, as I was watching this game, I was thinking, was last year's 4-5 season merely just kind of a 1-year detour, right, for Loyola? Because they certainly looked like their old state championship selves in this game against a really good Warren team, right? So they were dominant, 31-0 over Warren. They got 21 points in the first quarter. They led 24-0 at halftime. Matthew Lee, their quarterback, connected with Jordan McKinley on 2 touchdown passes, 40 and 42 yards. And they used their two running backs, 2 outstanding running backs, and Melo Maldonado, who rushed for over 135 yards, only on 8 carries, and Jaden Garrett, another 104 yards, only on 12 carries. So, I mean, they were ripping off huge chunks of yardage, their running backs. And defensively, Loyola looked really tough, right? I mean, they held a Warren team that's known for their running backs and being able to rush the ball. They held their top running back, who's Johnny Randolph, to 66 yards. And one of those runs, I think, was the first play, and he got 45 yards on that first play. So what that tells you is, the rest of the game, he only rushed for another 21 yards. So they locked it down big time. They looked like a John Holisek team, and they looked physical. They looked balanced. They looked disciplined. And of course, Holisek came out after the game and said, it's a good start, but not a great start. And that's typical Coach Holisek, I think. But moving forward, was last year just an aberration? Because based on week 1, Loyola appears ready to rejoin the state title conversation. And I know they're ranked high, in 8A already, but they looked ready for it and looked ready to be a part of that conversation for sure.
Joe, did you come away thinking Loyola was the best team you saw this weekend, or looked like week 4 or 5 versus week 1? We've talked about some of these teams having stuff to do where they didn't look like that. They looked like mid-season form.
You know what? I hadn't thought of that until you just brought it up, Dan, but now that I am thinking about it and I'm scrolling through some of the other games here, absolutely yes. They look like the most ready team, the most prepared team, and it was very evident in the way the game went. So yes, I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. I thought that this is a really, really well coached team. Even saying that about Lincoln Way East, they always look pretty prepared as well. But I thought out of the Catholic League schools, that's I didn't see all the games, far from it, but just what I did watch and read about, that they seemed like the most ready to go in week 1.
All right, good. So next game, Dan, that, I think this team was ready to go as well. I think it's fairly evident by the score, but the Montini-Hoopston area game.
Yeah, and Joe, kind of the thing about this game, really took place kind of before the game. They dedicated their new field. They've got new turf that they put down and dedicated the field to head coach Chris Andriano, longtime Hall of Fame coach, at least 6 state championships, I think, and great record. He was a coach when we played back against Montini, and the game was almost kind of an afterthought. I hate to say that, but they beat Hoopston 48-0. They had a running clock at one point in the second half, and so it was never really much of a game. Montini dominated from the start. Not a ton of stuff out there from a statistic standpoint on this game. I think people kind of thought, like we thought, that this game was one of the matchups in week 1 that might not be much of a game compared to some of these marquee games we have. And it kind of played out that way, where Montini kind of dominated, was able to play a lot of people, and handled the Hoopston corn jerkers pretty easily.
Yeah, and I watched a bit of this game, not as much, because when I did tune in, it was already kind of out of hand, for Hoopston, and Montini was up big. But, I was thinking, what can we learn about Montini from this game? And there's really not much.
No,
right?
No, I felt the same way. I was like, this is not like some of these other games out there that we're covering. And so we look down the road to see if Montini, where they're at, and get a better idea of what type of team they have overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And they go to, they play Sandburg this coming week, or in the next game. Sandburg's 1-0. They beat Riverside Brookfield 28-6. So maybe it'll be a little bit more of a test for Montini, but we'll see. The next game I wanted to cover here, Dan, was St. Francis versus New Palestine, a game that we were looking forward to. This was a battle of 2 defending Class 5A state championships. St. Francis, obviously, here in Illinois. New Palestine from Indiana. And, what I felt like St. Francis controlled this game. throughout the majority of the game. But New Palestine showed why they are who they are and why they are state champions. They've got, there were 3 explosive plays for New Palestine where they were able to put points on the board, right? And, St. Francis trailed 7-0, but then Tivius Caldwell scored on a 2-yard run. Then St. Francis got a field goal. Caldwell then broke another 80-yard touchdown run to give, St. Francis was up 17-7 in the first half. But New Palestine's Ryder Gardner, I don't know if you saw this, but he is a player, right? I mean, when we talk about electric and being able to change the game in one play, this is a kid who can do that. He took a kickoff for 99 yards for a touchdown, cut the lead to 17-14. They really good quarterback too, and Rice Reagan, had an 84-yard touchdown run, another scoring pass to Gardner. So, if you look at the stats for this game, I think St. Francis outgained the Dragons 335-289, but they had 9 penalties, Dan, 2 turnovers, and let up those 3 big plays for touchdowns to New Palestine. And that was the difference for St. Francis. I don't think they got outplayed as much as they got kind of out exploded, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they controlled much of the game, but I see why New Palestine has won 29 consecutive games now.
Yeah, they were an established team, and I think I said during the prediction episode, I love their quarterback, the kind of the highlight stats, and I knew he could really run, and that Gardner's a big time receiver. He's I don't know if he's committed, but he's a FBS type guy. And I thought that combination, I didn't know how St. Francis would fare, but it did not surprise me to hear that they kind of out big played St. Francis in this game because they've got the experience and they've got guys who've done it before. So again, is it an upset? Probably not. But so definitely something that St. Francis can build on. I don't think they should feel like that they have long-term concerns for the season.
Yeah, and St. Francis is scheduled to play Clemente in the next game, but I did take a quick look, and Clemente forfeited their first game this week, so not sure what's going to happen with that. We'll monitor that throughout the week. So, but the next game was another big one, Dan, that you and I talked about in our prognosticus episode, and that was Fenwick and Joliet Catholic.
Yeah, Fenwick wins this game 28-13, and it I think one of the things prediction one of us made, I can't remember if it's you or me, but regarding Fenwick having some new players who are going to grab some headlines offensively, and that could be both quarterback Miles Hill and receiver Jimmy Watts. Jimmy Watts had 7 catches for 120 yards and a touchdown. This was a hard-hitting game, kind of exactly what you thought it might be. Fenwick scored 21 unanswered points to pull away in this game, but it was the person that jumped off the film the most to me was actually Joliet Catholic's Derek Bamato. He's a dude.
Yeah.
He hits people. He is carrying the ball, just kind of that rumbling, stumbling fullback that's just pounding away. But we did come into the year a little bit concerned about the Joliet Catholic offense, and give the Fenwick defense credit. They held Joliet Catholic to under 200 yards in total offense, but you didn't get to see a ton of the JCA offense in the second half because Fenwick had the ball the whole time. It felt like they won and dominated the field position battle. Did not surprise me that Fenwick made adjustments that helped them to get a victory in this. Coach Battaglia is such a good coach, and that pulling away didn't really surprise me. So Fenwick kind of picks up where they left off with a great win. I don't know if I'd call it signature win, Joe, but a really solid win to open the year. I know they're at Oak Park River Forest next week. I'm not sure who JCA has. I didn't see that. I don't know if you.
They've got Sacred Heart Griffin.
Oh, that's right.
JCA's got Sacred Heart Griffin.
What a schedule.
Yeah. So yeah, and Sacred Heart Griffin, I think I saw beat Lincoln Way Central 27-23. Oak Park River Forest had a big win, 39-8 over Rich Township. So both Both teams here, Fenwick and Joliet Catholic, have tough tests in week 2 coming up.
Yeah, there's no weeks off, and sometimes you can have that
Nope.
type of week, but I think some of these teams think, if I want to be playoff ready, I got to play that type of schedule. You can afford to do that when you're a good team and you're pretty confident you're going to get your 3 wins. So it's good to see, like we talked about in the preview episode, the scheduling was so much better this year. The games were so much better, the names and some of the marquee games. But this is one of them that, believe it or not, flew under the radar a little bit with some of the big games happening. But and there were some questions about Fenwick. Would they be more than Jake Deese? I think they started to answer that in week 1.
Yeah, I think so too. I liked what I saw in Miles Hill in the second half. He looked good. We were talking about who they were, how they would replace Jamin Williams, and I think they've got a quarterback there in Miles Hill.
Yeah, he's a good one. He's a good one.
He is good. All right, so the next game here is another big game, all sorts of big games in week 1, but St. Rita and Providence. And I feel like Providence made a early statement here, Dan, because they get out to a 3-touchdown lead over St. Rita and really were controlling the game. And then St. Rita just kind of mounted this furious comeback, right? Providence was up 28-7. Providence scored all of its touchdowns on the ground. 2 touchdowns by Broden Mackert, the running back. 2 touchdowns by Braden McKay, the other running back. But I feel like St. Rita refused to go away. Their quarterback, John Fennell, 2 touchdown passes to TJ Burgess. They cut the deficit to 1 touchdown with, I think, just over 4 minutes left. And then Providence tried a fake punt and it didn't work. And St. Rita got the ball back with really good field position. But, Providence was able to hold them off with last minute or last second throw into the end zone. But I think the story here might be Providence's ability to win, with toughness. And, there was a definite momentum shift in the second half here towards the end of the game, and they were able to weather that. And I saw Coach Plants after the game was quoted as saying, "We've got some things to," what do you think he said?
Work out, clean up.
Clean up. Yeah. So, but what I do feel like in watching Providence here is, they are a complete team. They've got a good offense, running the ball. They've got good defense. I think Jackson Hutton had 2 sacks in this game for Providence, and I think, they're going to be a difficult team to prepare for, especially considering, some of the weapons they have, primarily a running back, as well as, some of the other pieces they have at quarterback as well and the wide receivers. So, but a good game for Providence, a good week 1 win. St. Rita obviously has some work to do to get back to, hopefully get back to their winning ways. I think St. Rita, unfortunately, they gotta play Glenbard West this coming week.
Yeah, that's tough.
And Providence plays Kenwood. So good games, or a good game, but it's like you said, the schedule's always tough. And here's 2 teams that got 2 tough games coming up in week 2. All right, Dan. So the next game on our list is King and St. Lawrence.
Yeah. Now this to me is a legit upset, at least going into the game. Kind of reading some of the stuff following up afterward. King beats St. Lawrence at St. Lawrence 15-14. And this was kind of a big upset. The video I saw, showed King really, really happy. Like they kind of celebrated like they knew they had done something great by this, and while there's not a ton of information out there on this game, I think this may be a class that King has been pointing to. They've kind of been getting incrementally better and better. It's kind of what I'm learning after the fact. But St. Lawrence was kind of the same story. They're up 14-3 later in the game, and then all of a sudden it turns around and King's got 2 scores and don't convert the extra points, but are still up 15-14. Lawrence has the ball late, trying to get the ball down the field, and just kind of ran out of time. Completed a big pass to end the game, but it just wasn't enough. And the thing we were worried about coming into this game is how St. Lawrence might look offensively, having to replace so much production. And so I think
from Corey Less.
Yeah, from Corey Less. And we kind of wanted to see what they would look like. And it looked like, that they've got some things to clean up. They're still trying to figure some things out, on the offensive side of the ball. Like I said, I think this might be a King team that is better than we think as the season goes on. We'll have to see how it plays out, but St. Lawrence doesn't have it easy next week. They go to Prospect. So a good program with a good recent history. So I think they're kind of BATW right away.
Right away. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was wondering, St. Lawrence last year, I think they won 8 games, right? And went to the semifinals.
Yeah.
Do you think this is just an opening night stumble, or do you think it's a bit of an early warning sign that St. Lawrence might have a little bit more rebuilding to do than maybe we anticipated?
I think maybe a little bit, if I can say both. I wouldn't necessarily worry a ton, but their schedule is not easy, and I worry about them offensively. I think they are a defensive-minded team. I think Coach Nissen is still there, right, as offensive coordinator? No, I'm sorry.
No, he's at Providence.
He's at Providence. Yes. Sorry about that. I was trying to think of what their offense is, what it has the potential to look like, or what they want it to look like, and I still don't feel like I know. 13 games, into the new Coach Swanson's tenure. I don't know if they want to pound the ball, if they want to be throwing the ball, and where they want to, how they kind of want to do this as they move forward and improve as a program. So I'm a little concerned about that long term, and about who steps up to become their offensive playmaker, like they had with Corey last year. So a little bit to be concerned about because of the schedule and just how they looked, and a home loss, but it's a week 1, and we're going to see a lot of teams change pretty drastically. If you think about the week 1s from previous years that we've done this, even up to week 4, we've seen teams completely flip and become different teams the second half of the season. So I'm a little concerned, but I'm probably jumping the gun on that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next game, Dan. And this was another big game, Nazareth versus IC. And I think out of this game came one of week 1's biggest statements in the Chicago Catholic League. And, I think IC proved that what class they're in is not going to seem to matter this year. They knock off Nazareth 35-21, really behind, an explosive offense, a balanced offense. Nate Lang, their quarterback, 16 of 22 for 246 yards and 3 touchdowns. Grant Bowen, who we've talked about, he had 2 of the touchdowns in the first half. Also, Anthony Caraccio had another touchdown. But I think the breakout star for IC in this game was Jacoby Baldwin, their running back. He rushed for 19 times for 204 yards and 2 touchdowns. Excuse me. And, we talked about how good we thought Nazareth's defense was going to be this year, Dan. Yeah. And IC just kind of carved them up. So I don't know if that says more about IC or more about Nazareth's defense, and that we, but they've got some stuff to clean up defense.
I was shocked, Joe. I was shocked. I thought for sure I think my prediction of Nazareth averaging giving up less than like 7 points a game or something is in jeopardy in week 1. It just sure with the players they had returning and their ability and some of the things, I was really, really surprised by this. And just because I just felt like, I thought Nazareth might not be what we've seen offensively. Might look a little different, especially to start, but really impressed with IC. Even more so than Naz failing. I'm more impressed with the performance of IC, and that's a huge, like you said, statement victory for IC.
Yeah, and the one thing is Jacoby Baldwin, he has the ability to outrun people. I mean, he's that fast. but I didn't realize how strong of a runner he was too, because a lot of his runs are big runs. He was running over people on the Nazareth defense. I mean, knocking them backwards. And it was an incredible performance by Jacoby Baldwin. So, see if that continues going forward. The one thing I do feel like Naz, found a quarterback here in J.J. Chapman. He threw for over 300 yards. Now, a lot of that came towards the end when they were trying to, mount a comeback here. But, he also threw a couple of interceptions. I think Donnell Salas and Will Schmidt from IC both had interceptions in this game. So, some mistakes like that, some turnovers like that I think really hurt Nazareth. But I do think J.J. Chapman is going to be a good one, over the course of this year.
Joe, what year is Jacoby Baldwin?
Yeah, I believe he's a sophomore.
Oof.
I'm looking for it. Yeah, he is a sophomore.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Whoa, boy, my goodness.
Remember last year as a freshman, remember he was hurt and people, we didn't really know who people were talking about. They're like, oh, IC's got this freshman running back. Wait till he gets back. We'll see what he can do. And then the first game he came back, he kind of exploded. This year he's somebody that's going to have to be reckoned with every game. It looks like to me.
I heard about Jacoby Baldwin, Joe. Before we move on, I heard about him as I think a youth football player. That he was like the best youth player in the area. So it doesn't surprise me. I thought he was young, but he will definitely be one we've got to put a little star by.
Yeah, for sure. And so the next game, Dan, is the St. Ignatius versus St. Viator, and you had a chance to cover this one. What did you see here?
Quite a statement for St. Ignatius and St. Viator. 51-0. Ignatius rolls over Viator. And I went back and looked at the score from last year, and it was lopsided. Last year was, I think, 44-3 or something like that. It was kind of a blowout last year, but I did not expect this from St. Ignatius on the road. We knew that they would be improved, but this is an absolute thrashing at St. Viator, and I think what everyone thought would be a closer game. St. Viator just did not have an answer for the Wolfpack option offense. They held the ball. They had big plays. It was just kind of a thorough butt kicking of St. Viator by St. Ignatius, and it could spell, like we talked about. I feel like these some of these teams that aren't necessarily the true blue bloods of the conference, they take a little bit to reload after they have, and people learning the system. St. Ignatius has a bunch of guys coming of age, and they are really, really looking for a big year, and this kind of puts them out there, I think, as we're going to have to be reckoned with a little bit. And Viator did not have an answer for their offense. Still searching for an identity on the offensive side of the football and ways to win a football game. They've lost a bunch of games in a row now. Kind of a struggle at the moment, not necessarily the way Coach Gold wanted to open the season at home. They have to go to St. Pat's next week, St. Viator, so that's going to be an issue for them, while St. Ignatius is at home versus Hope Academy. So great statement win for St. Ignatius over St. Viator.
And you mentioned, Dan, it was hard to tell from this game whether Ignatius is going to be, one of these breakout teams again, like they did several years ago, or as their schedule gets tougher as the year goes on, does that change? And the only reason I say it that way is because it's hard to tell how what St. Viator is or how good they might be. Obviously they didn't put up much of a fight against Ignatius, but I just don't know how good St. Viator is or will be this year.
Yeah, that's the most challenging thing. We know they lost some players, to transfer, and they did get some too, but they could be putting that together. It's hopefully they're able to give St. Pat's a game next week, and we'll see if they can't turn things around, and I'm really excited to see if St. Ignatius is a true breakout candidate this year in the Catholic League.
Yeah, me too. All right, so the next game I want to go to, Dan, is DePaul Prep, and they played Richards, and I think DePaul Prep may have delivered one of the more maybe overlooked statements of week one, going on the road, going to Richards, defeating a good Richards team, 32-22. And, this was a back and forth first half. DePaul Prep scored 14 points in the opening quarter, 7 more in the second. But then Richards came back and scored 22 points of its own, and they took a 22-21 lead into halftime. And then there was nobody scored in the third quarter, and then DePaul comes back and completely shuts down Richards over the final 2 quarters, and they score 11 unanswered points in the fourth quarter. So I think Richards, they entered the season, they were ranked 8th in Class 7A preseason poll after finishing 9-2 last year. So we know what DePaul did last year. They had a tough year last year, missed the playoffs. So this is a huge turnaround for Coach Bizzieri, really in his first game, only being at DePaul Prep for 8 weeks as a head coach before the season starts. And we know losing a bunch of players, transferring to other schools. So the job he did here is incredible, I think. We'll see how that continues going forward. But Tyson Hooks, who we talked about, 2 long runs for TDs. He also threw for a 2-point conversion. Liam Lucy and Zach Stewart, wide receivers for them, both with touchdowns. On defense, George Farrell with 3 interceptions, 2 of them huge, stopping drives by Richards. So I think the storyline here is kind of resilience by DePaul Prep, and we'll see. Are they ready to become a factor again in the Chicago Catholic League? Beating a ranked Class 7A opponent on the road suggests that they might be a little better, a little more dangerous than maybe we thought they might be.
Yeah. How happy were you for Coach Bizzieri? I mean, he was, whenever they come on our show, it's always kind of cool that when we see him have success and know how hard they're working. And he was kind of, like you said, thrown into this. So this is kind of the biggest upset or biggest statement game of the week. Again, flew under the radar because there were so many good games, but DePaul won't fly under the radar anymore because that's a big win against a really good Richards team, traditionally strong, playoff advance last year. So congratulations to Coach and DePaul Prep.
Yeah, and next week they've got Lane Tech, who won their first game 28-21 over Shepherd. So it'll be another test for DePaul Prep in week 2.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one.
But it will be. The next game here, Dan, is Revis and De La Salle. And we know, De La Salle went 0-9 last year. So, we both were interested to see, how they would do in this week 1 game, as well as, can you see the progress that maybe they're making? And what did you see with this game, Dan?
Yeah, Revis beats DePaul or De La Salle 53-34. And so while that sounds like and it was kind of a lopsided victory, there's and I'm sure Coach Blackman hates to hear this type of analysis or opinion of the game. But they looked much better offensively. Samaj Sirleaf was 5 of 8 for 69 yards, but Revis did get out to a 33-6 lead. De La Salle made it 33-14 on a 95-yard touchdown by Cameron Mosley, who had 150 yards rushing. So
another running back. Yep.
Yeah. So there's some good things to be had. The last piece to this puzzle for De La Salle for true competitiveness on a week in and week out basis, I think we said this in a previous episode, is defensively. You've got to be able to stop the running game. Revis really pounded him with the running game, and De La Salle just could not get that done over the weekend. So, but it's the best they've looked offensively in over 2 years. So, if they can get that defensive piece to come up, and maybe that's another season thing. I know they don't want to hear that at all, but that might be where they're at, where they start to figure it out offensively, become pretty dangerous, and some teams have a tough time stopping them. We'll see as they host Plainfield East next week, Joe. If this kind of offensive improvement continues, and if they can do something on the defensive side of the ball to at least stop the run. If you've got to dedicate everything to stopping the run, you've got to pick one thing that you can stop, and that has to be their focus from now on.
Yeah, and one of the things that I took away from this game, and looking for, as I mentioned, looking for some progress from last year to this year. I think De La Salle finished the year last year, their last 7 games, getting shut out in each game over those last 7 games. This game, yes, I mean, kind of lopsided and stuff, but they put up 34 points, right? And to me, that's huge, that they can put up 34 points. And even if it's against Revis's second team, I mean, that's no different than what De La Salle faced last year, too.
Right.
Many of their games they were facing second teams and all that kind of stuff, but they still put up the 34 points. So I'm looking at that as real progress. I think Coach Blackman, you don't want to lose, but maybe it's something to kind of tie yourself to and build up as you're going forward into the rest of the season.
Yeah, if they can hold the football a little bit more and maybe try and keep their defense off the field, they've got something to work with now that they can start to hang their hat on.
Yeah. All right. And so we had a game, Carmel versus Hersey, that that we previewed in our prognosticus episode. And, one of the things we talked about was, Carmel obviously losing Trey Taylor to transfer out to Nebraska, and their new quarterback, Reed Dangle, who was a transfer in from Warren, and how that was going to go for them. But I do think they found a quarterback, Dan, and Reed Dangle. He was 20 of 34 for 281 yards. Had a good game, but unfortunately, they went up against one of the elite quarterbacks in the state of Illinois for Hersey, Jake Narot, and he threw for 273 yards and 3 scores while he ran for another one. Hersey jumped out to a 16-0 lead, but even, Carmel was able to kind of find some offensive rhythm in this, but they were never able to get back to within one score. The one thing that I found interesting in this game, Dan, was that we also talked about the 2 outstanding running backs for Carmel, and that's Jaquel Edmonds and Jordan Moore. And, unfortunately for Carmel, they got far behind, and, they had to throw the ball more than run the ball. So, Jaquel Edmonds and Jordan Moore weren't able to make that big of a difference in this game. I'm sure that's going to change going forward. But I think the question here is, the better question might be, can Carmel keep games close enough, right, to fully utilize the strength of their backfield or their running backs, because I think that's where their real strength is on offense. So their defense has got to, they gave up 38 points in this game. They've got to step up, right? And, they've got to hold some other teams down, much less than that, if they're going to win their share of games this year. So, we'll see how they do going forward. They did face a really good team in Hersey. And next week they go to Lake Forest, who lost to Deerfield 28-6.
Yeah, that's a bit of a surprise, that Lake Forest score, So yeah, it was exactly the opposite of what I thought it might be. Yeah, they came out, Carmel had to throw the ball all over and just couldn't keep up with Hersey, which I was kind of afraid of. And Hersey, this is one of those years for Hersey, and we'll see how far they can go. So, definitely not something that they should think too much about past film review, because I think brighter days are ahead. And I think the fact that they got a great performance from their quarterback, Carmel, that's really a positive thing that show that they still have that ability when they need it.
Yeah, and they also found a wide receiver too, Dan, and Kyron Hart. I think he caught 6 passes for 112 yards. So, they definitely have some bright spots here on offense. They just got to, their defense has got to do a little bit more, and you've got to get the ball more to some of the running backs. So we'll see next week versus Lake Forest how they do. But the next game, and this is a team, the Red Division champs from last year, Dan, Marian Catholic, and they opened up against Bloom.
Yeah, they defeat Bloom, at Bloom this week. Marian Catholic gets their first victory, 27-9. They were led by Antonio Banks with 2 rushing touchdowns. So there's another great player, a running back to talk about in the league, as well as is it Drew Gores, wide receiver? I can't think of it.
Yes.
I can't think of his name. Yeah. So
Andrew.
he also had 2 touchdowns. Andrew. Yes, Andrew. And they scored 20 points, 20 unanswered in the fourth quarter, which is really, really awesome way to get that victory. We talked about this game, Joe, early on, that it was a great scheduling game. These teams have played in the past, but not a ton. And, kind of that neighborhood game, regardless of if they've played together or not, as we're learning in youth football, we say it maybe because we wish it to be true, but we're going to call it a good rivalry anyway. A great win for Marian Catholic. A big way to come back in the fourth quarter. Like I said, 20 unanswered to win this game, 27-9. Next week, Marian goes to the Peoria area to take on the Morton Potters. So they're always a good program. I don't know what Morton did this week, but they
lost.
Marian gets a really good one in victory at Bloom.
Yeah, I think Morton lost to Muhammad Seymour, Dan, 33-15.
Okay.
Write that down.
Yeah. Yes, I'll get it. I'll have it ready for the prognosticus. He's going to want to know.
All right, good. Yeah, for sure. All right, so another game here that I was really looking forward to, or we were looking forward to, just to see kind of progress another team in the CCL is making, and this was Leo versus Proviso East. And this is the second season for Leo under Coach Hopkins, and they go on the road. They go to Proviso East, and they convincing win here for them, 46-6 over Proviso East. And they controlled the game on both sides of the ball. They scored 6 touchdowns. They held Proviso East to just 1 score. And really, really dominated this game when you look at it, Dan, from quarter to quarter. And, Leo's offense kind of, starts and stops. But obviously they scored 6 touchdowns. So, some big plays. They've got a really good sophomore quarterback in Terrence Wilson, who had a really nice game. The receiver, Antonio Clark, great game. Two-way player, Tawalo Johnson, another really good player. The other thing is their defense is tough. Leo's defense is tough. They're big up front. They're athletic. They've got a linebacker in the middle who is all over the field. So I think Leo made a bit of a statement in this game that, maybe on offense, they've got to, they've still got some work to do. They got to clean some stuff up. But on defense, they are ready to go. They really are. They look good. So, next week they they play Eisenhower, who lost to Piatone 28-6. And, I think Leo has probably got to be favored, in this next game too. So I think Leo gave a bit of a statement to the Red Division in the Chicago Catholic League this year that they may be a team to be reckoned with in the division. Yeah,
we kind of thought this might be happening with Leo. I expected them to beat Proviso East like this, so it's not really a surprise. They may be doing it backward than what we talked about with De La Salle. They may have the defensive side closer to figured out than the offensive side. So, but a great victory. Good to see them. And if they could be 2-0, that's awesome.
Yeah, it would be. All right. And St. Patrick against Rolling Meadows, Dan. And, you obviously covered this game, but St. Patrick put up 54 points, which to me, that was a big surprise.
Yeah, they talk about big, Joe. You mentioned Leo being big up front. St. Pat's still really big up front on the offensive line. Yeah. I mean, they completely outsized and kind of out-physicaled Rolling Meadows in this game. Jaden Miranda, we talked about, had a great game. He runs hard. He doesn't even need great blocking. He kind of is one of these guys that creates his own blocking because he runs through tackles, runs around people. And then Rocco Mertens, Jr., like running back / wide receiver, really electric player. That combination, plus Gavin Gardner plays a really steady game. He's going to find ways to get the ball to those two guys, and they're going to have a really nice year. This game was kind of close-ish into the second half, but you could see that St. Pat's size. Rolling Meadows never really stopped St. Pat's. St. Pat's might have stopped themselves a couple times, but Rolling Meadows never really stopped them. Joe, interesting to note here that their number one recruit in the state, rated recruit David Folarancho. He's playing both sides of the football, getting some time at offensive tackle.
Really?
So they're kind of spelling him, and I like the way they're using him. They're finding ways for him to have impact on both sides of the ball. In this weather, when we saw, I don't know if you saw, but a ton of cramps, as you see every year early in the year, but he's going on both sides of the ball. But they are dangerous. They're going to be a dangerous team, a lot to contend with. They gave up 27 points, but Rolling Meadows quarterback and running back, two really good, both I would call electric players. So they had, if they needed a little more to kind of hang with St. Pat's, because they couldn't stop them at all, but they had some offensive weapons. So that'll be the thing to see, is what St. Pat's looks like defensively as we kind of go through the year. And they host St. Viator next week, so chance for them to go to 2-0, get this next game at home. So I'm interested to see them, but they look a lot like we've gotten used to St. Pat's looking, very big, physical, and a hard-nosed run the football team.
Okay, all right, good. And we've now got Marmion versus Racine Lutheran, Dan, and Racine Lutheran from Wisconsin, really good team, playoff team last year. So a good test for Marmion. Marmion ends up, losing this game 23-21, but it was a game that came right down to the end. Marmion trailed 10-7 after the first quarter. It was a back and forth battle, before Racine Lutheran escaped with a 2-point victory. But I wasn't able to get too much in the way of stats on this, but again, another running back in the Chicago Catholic League, Henry Miller, who we talked about from Marmion. I had 2 touchdowns in this game, but what this came down to was, some of the smaller details, right? There was a 2-point margin that could have swung on one conversion, one defensive stop or one additional scoring drive. Marmion had the ball at the end and was driving and, ended up throwing an interception, and that was kind of the end of the game. So a tough start for Marmion, a tough loss, but a loss against good opponent, and Marmion went 4-5 last season. And, I think they showed in this game that, they're capable of maybe taking a step forward, based on how they played Racine Lutheran. But I think they need to be able to, obviously turn some of these competitive, games or performances like this into victories and, to get back into the postseason. So, they play Lincoln Park coming up, who beat North Lawndale 28-0. So, Lincoln Park will be another good test for Marmion in week 2.
Yeah, that is, it's good to see them compete against a playoff team from last year. Be interesting to see how that progresses. It's hard when you don't know much about the program they play to see what it means, if anything, over the next few weeks. But so we should start to get a better idea next week for what Marmion's going to look like in the CCL.
Okay, and one of the games you and I had red lettered, starred, whatever you want to call it, was the Benet Academy Lena Winslow game, one that we were really looking forward to. And, we both had a chance to watch some of this game, but tell me what your thoughts were in regards to Benet and Lena Winslow.
Do we have to open with, we're sorry. We're sorry.
Maybe.
Yeah. We both picked Lena Winslow in this game.
Yeah. I would say, Dan, I'm sorry with a big smile on my face, because I love the way Benet played in this game and the way they looked. But anyways, go on.
Yeah, they did look really good. They get the win over Lena Winslow, and it was a great game for Benet, because they were down. They were down a couple scores. At one point they were down several times. throughout the game, but they used an all-around team effort to win this game. They had a special teams, a kickoff return from Luca Diamidi. They got touchdown receptions from John Erickson and Gio Sanderlin. Alex Mitchell had 2 or 3 touchdown passes. A guy who absolutely jumped off the film was Hawk Lawler, who scored a touchdown for Benet.
Yes.
He looks like he's got another gear, Joe, that some of the players don't have on the field. I don't know if you saw that as well. It's like, whoa. Some guys just jump out like that. And Hawk Lawler was one of those guys. Benet came back a few times in this game and took advantage of Lena Winslow errors, but they showed some grit. They had at least one goal line stand and a couple tough stops against the Lena Winslow team that returned running backs and offensive linemen from a state championship team. Granted, they're 1A, but like I said, I'm not. If I took that off the table for the prediction, I'm going to take it off the table for the recap. They had returning players from a state championship team. Benet looked really gritty in this performance. Coach James White should be really proud of what the Red Wings were able to do in a hard-fought road win, a lot of travel against a team that's really used to winning. So a great victory for Benet, confidence builder. Benet played a lot of young guys and a lot of guys playing varsity for the first time. So they get Glenbard North next week. So definitely a change in the type of team they're playing. They go from a small school to a big school. North had their number and took it to them a little bit last year, so they've got to have a little bit of revenge on their mind. But congratulations to Coach James White on his first victory as a high school coach, and congratulations to the Red Wings because they showed real grit in this game.
Yeah, grit, and they come out of this game with a ton of confidence too, which is going to be huge for them going forward. One of the things I loved about watching this game and some of the players, and you just mentioned some of them in Alex Mitchell, the quarterback, Luca Diamidi, wide receiver, return man, Hawk Lawler, who is, a playmaker for sure, and John Erickson, right? So they've got some guys who are difference makers, with either grit and attitude or just, flat out some speed too, which I saw a lot of on the field for Benet. I think they were much faster and more athletic, I think, than Lena Winslow. And they took Lena Winslow out of their game, as far as wanting to just kind of grind the ball. And Benet's defense played great. They were, they gave up some points, but, when they needed to make a play, the defensive line and Dean Mia at linebacker, they came up and made a play. So I was really encouraged by the way Benet looked, and I'm excited to see how they do going forward here.
Yeah, Joe, I don't think I said the final score. So Benet wins 34-28 is the final in that game. So just to make sure we have that on the record. And looking forward to seeing how they continue to progress under Coach White and see how some of these young guys start to grab the headlines in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah. All right. So the last game we've got here, Dan, is Notre Dame versus Westinghouse. Notre Dame was my pick to click this year in the purple division, and they couldn't have asked for a much better opening night. In my opinion, they overwhelmed Westinghouse 50-6, and their quarterback Eric Cooper threw 4 touchdown passes. Chris Love, incredible debut for him at the varsity level at running back, ran for 196 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns. So he announced himself in a breakout performance. Notre Dame was in control the whole time, 29-0 halftime lead. Then they put 21 more points on the board after that. And, Notre Dame really kept Westinghouse off the scoreboard until the third quarter. And then, they only gave up 6 points in the whole game. So, they looked more explosive to me on offense. Remember last year we were talking about their offense, and it was, there was kind of 2-3 yards in a cloud of dust a lot of the times and didn't put a lot of points on the board. I think it's going to be different this year for them because they look faster, they look bigger, and they look more explosive as a football team. So, for me was, was this Westinghouse struggling, or was it Notre Dame announcing that, hey, we're going to be much better this year. We're going to be a factor in the CCL in the Purple Division, and we'll learn more next week when they go to Morgan Park. But I think a 44-point victory for Notre Dame in its first game of the year under Coach DeFranza is a huge win for them.
Yeah, that is. I felt like your pick is pretty solid as kind of the surprise team, because they looked really good. They looked like a different offense than what we've seen. And you mentioned the running back. They also Eric Cooper to is it Peter Pangiotopoulos?
Yes,
Yeah,
Peter Pangiotopoulos, one of our favorite names.
Yeah, great Greek name. But they that looks like a pretty dangerous combination that people are going to have to contend with all year. So they have some guys, and like you said, the size looks really good for Notre Dame. So I like your pick as a surprise this year, because they looked really dominant in this game.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our games, and now we're to the point where we want to announce our Dog of the Week. And this is an award we've been giving for the last 2 years. And the award goes to a defensive player who exhibits some of the traits of a real dog. And, this week, we had several really good performances on the defensive side of the ball. And what I looked at, Dan, for this award this week was not only have a really good performance, but who really performed or had the plays when the team really needed it, really counting on them, and really kind of shut down the other team's offense. And I looked at several players, but I came to the point that I could not deny giving George Farrell from DePaul Prep, defensive back, the Dog of the Week award for week one. Just an outstanding game. He had 3 interceptions. He was all over the field for DePaul Prep, and 2 of those interceptions came at really important times in the game, which I think is really key. Stopping drives by Richards when Richards was trying to get themselves back into the game, and George Farrell stepped up 3 times with interceptions, but 2 times when it really, really was key and important and made a huge difference. So this week's Dog of the Week is George Farrell, defensive back from DePaul Prep.
Yeah, congratulations to George. There were some good candidates. I think I said early on, Derek Pomato from Joliet Catholic had a beast of a game defensively. I really liked what Matt Brophy and Adam, I think is Alcurti, from Notre Dame. They were kind of menaces for Notre Dame against Westinghouse, but George Farrell came up big when it mattered with big turnovers, which is essential dog performance. So congratulations to George Farrell and DePaul Prep on George winning the Dog of the Week.
All right, so that wraps up week one. That gave us a lot of answers and a lot of questions as well. Mount Carmel and Brother Rice now have to respond after difficult opening losses. I see Providence, Fenwick, Benet, and Notre Dame all made some early statements, while several other teams already face important week 2 tests. Was week 1 simply a collection of opening night surprises, or did we get our first real glimpse of a changing order within the Chicago Catholic League? We'll learn more next week with Mount Carmel hosting St. Joseph Regional, Loyola traveling to Indianapolis to take on Cathedral, Nazareth facing York, St. Rita visiting Glenbard West, and Notre Dame taking on Morgan Park. Let us know which player or team impressed you the most in week 1 and which result surprised you the most. For Dan, I'm Joe. Thank you for listening to the Varsity Voices. Make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you get the show. Visit us on Substack at thevarsityvoices.substack.com, and we'll be back with our week 2 predictions this week and another edition of the Prognosticus. And thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.